Hello and welcome to today's remote session. This is Tom Bechtold, your host from Secure World Digital. Welcome back from the break, everybody. I feel like I've been gone a while. I took a long time off for the break for Thanksgiving, so it's interesting. I found my way back to the office. So welcome, everybody. Today is Tuesday, December 3rd. We're talking about maximizing security effectiveness with limited resources. This is one of my favorite types of topics because as you guys know, you tune in a lot. I love the security awareness stuff, but I love it when we have topics where it's like, you know what? I don't have a checking account or a budget that has an unlimited amount of funds. So I love it when we can actually help folks do stuff with the limited funding and availability of resources that they actually have. So I love these kind of topics. I want to say thank you to the folks over at Blumira for making it possible, coming up with a topic for us today. I think that's great, like I said, but thank you for making this possible. They've also shared some educational content in our resource tab. So check those out. There's some PDF or URLs in there along with today's slides. That's PDF'd as well in case you need that for proof of attendance. But speaking of proof of attendance, after about 45 minutes, there is a downloadable certificate of attendance that you can get from the platform that'll be proof for your certifying bodies. If you have any problems with that, it is a pop-up. Just shoot me a quick email, tomb@secureworld.io, and I'll try to get one made for you as soon as I can. I'm really slow about getting those. I'm going to tell you because I have other stuff I'm doing. But I'll try to get those as soon as I can. We're going to take questions. So if you have questions in there, we're using the attendee chat as well as the Q&A. Throw stuff in there. Let's have a discussion amongst ourselves as well as listening to our presenters today. If you're having any audio or video issues, hit F5 or function F5. That should fix most of the challenges out there. If you have a consistent problem, though, we're recording this stuff, and this will be available on the website for the next 6 months. So I would also say if you hear something that you are like, whoa, wait a minute. I know that Bob and Sally are having that same problem. Share that link that you used to join today. Share that with them because they can actually come back. They'll get a CPE credit for checking it out, but you might actually save them some headaches down the line with some newfound knowledge, right? So please share this information. I say this all the time. We don't have a silver bullet in cybersecurity, but collaboration and sharing information is pretty darn close, and that we got to start utilizing that more because, frankly, the bad guys do that. So that being said, who are we talking to today? So I've got two awesome people from Blumira coming in. Zoe Lindsey, she's a security strategist over there, and Matt Warner, he's the co-founder and CTO of the company. And I actually, I have some nuggets of information. Matt, I'm going to spoil this a little bit on his intro, so he won't be able to use this now. But Matt was actually out there as a practitioner, like many of you out there, and he was struggling with like finding the right stuff to get his job done. And he was like, you know what? I'm going to make something instead. This is kind of the short version, the abbreviated version. But that's what happened. He got tired of dealing with inadequate stuff that just wasn't fitting what he needed to get done. And it was like, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and make my own thing. And lo and behold, the guy's got a whole company now, and he's actually helping other people in similar scenarios. And that's all I know I'm sounding like I'm selling for him. I'm not. That was a cool story that I heard. And I just wanted to share that with you guys. So out there in the audience. So that being said, I think I kind of talked a little bit about this. You know, a lot of you out there are kind of resource strapped. You're out there looking for stuff. You're hoping AI might be able to help you with stuff. There's a lot of things out there swirling around, and you might not have all the answers you need. So today we're going to be talking about how to identify opportunities for consolidating security resources and improve your efficiencies. We're going to talk about why centralized alerts and log data can accelerate investigations. Or we're going to talk about metrics to track measuring your progress and make the case for getting funding improvements when you actually need them, not just because some vendor told you that you need to buy this stuff, right? So we're going to get into this stuff today. So that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Zoe and Matt. Welcome, both of you. The floor is yours. I'm going to be taking notes. I'm going to try to ask you guys some questions at the end, try to stump you maybe. I don't know, probably not, but I'm going to give it a shot. But yeah, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. Again, my name is Zoe. I'm joined here by Matt. There we go. We have an introduction slide. And today we are going to be talking about maximizing your tech stack, your security stack with a limited budget. We're going to be going through first, it always helps to set the stage, and you'll notice this is a recurring theme as we go through the conversation today. To know where you're going, you have to know where you are. So we're going to take a look at some of the challenges that are facing mid-sized businesses today. Then we're going to talk about what it takes to plan for success, what successful security strategy planning looks like in practice, specifically in a growing business, in a mid-sized business, as it relates to some of those challenges that we're seeing. And finally, we're going to talk about how you find those 10x versus 10% improvements and moving our thinking from incremental to exponential improvement and the work up front that needs to happen for that. So kicking us off, I don't think that anything on this slide is going to be a particular surprise to anybody listening. In fact, you may be feeling one or more of these quite acutely. But it is helpful to take a look at, what some of the common challenges are, and we'll look at how the data backs that up. First off, we know there's always more tasks on the list than there is time to do them. I think that is as close as we get to a speed of light constant in IT. There's always one more thing that you could be fixing. Specifically when we're talking about security and an approach that oftentimes has been boiled down to eyes on glass, we aren't in a typical scale where we have the budget or the staffing for 24/7 team. And so that means that we're looking at tools that are assuming that we have round-the-clock coverage. Those aren't going to work in most of our businesses. We need something that is going to scale and work with the teams that we have and not the teams that ideally we would like to get funding for. Finally, complexity. The goal was, as we started to see a shift to cloud services, that we would be able to simplify and reduce the number of things that we had to push out in our environment. And instead, we have a reality where it's hundreds to sometimes thousands of applications and services that are existing within an environment that need to be coordinated, overseen, and then actually monitored and have controls enforced, usually by a whole other suite of services and applications. So this is descriptive, but not measured, right? So let's take a look at how some of these problems manifest. First off, we know orgs don't scale evenly. I had somebody in my first startup once tell me that startup businesses have a long puberty and that they don't grow evenly, right? Sometimes your arms are getting longer, sometimes you're getting a little bit taller. Doesn't all happen in order or in the logical sense, incremental sense that we would like. But in this workforce survey that they had, where they looked at specifically the ratio of IT staff as compared to the total employment of the organization. And you see in a small organization, less than 500 total employees, when we're looking at those best performing organizations, we see the best ratio of IT staff to total employees, which can be a little bit confusing because oftentimes that is where the IT staff is also wearing multiple hats. So your IT person may also be doing other business functions as well, and that can skew the ratio. As we get up and look at 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, we see that those efficiencies of scale start to pay dividends. We're able to build processes and leverage tool sets that let a smaller staff work with a larger user base in that ratio equation. But that range, that mid-range of 500 to 1,000, pretty much across the board, tends to be one of the most challenging in terms of that ratio of staff to IT staff to total organization base. And that's because that is in the thick of that growth period where you have enough people that you really do need to have the staff to help cover them. But you don't necessarily have the budget or the organizational support to go out there and hire the people or get the tools that you need in order for that to actually play out. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on doomsaying. We are going to talk a little bit about some of the risks and threats that are out there so we can anchor the conversation in something real and practical. But I very quickly want to get into what we can do about it instead of what should be keeping us up at night. But we know almost half of SMBs said their company has experienced some form of data breach. Almost a little over a quarter have experienced some form of ransomware attack. And in preparation for this talk, I was looking at some of the more recent statistics in trends on ransomware that have been happening. And this came off of the Coveware quarterly report. And I thought what was really interesting here is what we're seeing happen over time. So if we look at the history of ransomware, and I'm talking about the modern history, not going all the way back to like proof of concept, but like in practice, where we start to see the proliferation of ransomware variants and gangs, and it starts to become a leading cause or a leading source of attacks. We saw first a very transactional entry into the market, very easy targets, mom and pop, literally getting their system encrypted. You're getting, a few hundred, maybe $1,000 for each of those transactions, but you can spam it out there and just wait until people bite and only follow up on those. As the tools got more sophisticated, as gangs got more organized, we started to see an entry in the high end of the market. These very targeted attacks that will pick out an enterprise, go through even third-party supply chain to try and get access to them. And usually that coordinated attack is going to have multiple prongs. You're going to have ransomware. You're probably going to have extortion too. What we've seen in the last couple of years, and I think that there's a few factors that are contributing to this, is a move towards the middle of the market. We're seeing the median company size creep upwards because the median count has been kept low. The majority of those attacks are still happening in the smaller space. A select group of high enterprise attacks is not going to throw that median off overall. However, as we start to see the average size of organization being targeted grow, the median size is going up. And with that, the ransoms that are being successfully extracted are going up as well because those larger organizations are able to have a little bit more squeezed out of them. What's causing this? I think that there's a few factors that come into play. Part of it is the commoditization of these tools. Economies of scale and the benefits of cloud services don't just exist for legitimate businesses. And it made it a lot more practical for small operations or even solo operators to be competitive and launch what once would have required multiple specialists in order to accomplish. Similarly, it's getting hot out there. Law enforcement is getting serious about trying to track down, in particular, these name brand gangs that are really embarrassing large organizations out there. And so there's a motivation to push those operators to move into going into business for themselves where they're a less attractive target. Now, all of this has been very directly experienced by Matt. And so, Matt, I want to have you talk a little bit about, what your experience has been coming up in those growing organizations and to where you are today. What is it like when you're on the operational side of this, and what were some of the headaches that you were seeing?
Thank you, Zoe. Yeah, I mean, it is. This is a good picture because you can still smoke inside when this picture is taken. Tells you how old it is. It's really interesting for those who, when you think back to the teens and then back into the noughts, and then you look further back into the 90s and how we approach cybersecurity and really just IT as a whole, the changes in the makeup of IT and what's in there really has never driven us to the point where we all felt like we're doing a great job, might be the best way to put it. Which is to say, as you're saying, Zoe, we can get cloud services up and going. We can move down 365 and drop Outlook Mail at our border. Like, there are a bunch of ways to solve our problems. But in the grand scheme of it all, there are always going to be kind of this continuous effort on the defensive side, especially in SMB and mid-market, where it is really more trying to kind of line up what your business expectation is with what the attackers are taking advantage of, and how do you really even stay in front of that. And if I think back to like the 2010, 2012 time period, we were dealing with Emotet attacking financial environments, trying to take data out of those environments. And now you look at what Emotet is today, and they are essentially brokering access for ransomware instead of just dropping Trojans and stealing data. And those two situations could happen to the exact same company 10 years ago and today. And the impact would have been, well, I lost some data, but I don't actually have to tell anyone about this. You're not in healthcare. Versus now, which is my entire organization has been ransomed. what am I, and my data has still been taken, what is the next step for me? So it's an area that, you know, when we look at the ratios of IT to actual workers in the environment, and as Zoe very rightly pointed out, you get this kind of smeared across multiple hats in IT, where especially in organizations that are able to say like, well, looking at our company, we have this many people. We know, looking at Bureau of Labor and Statistics, those numbers from just a pure raw number of employees in the US versus number of people working in IT is way outside that range of kind of what we're seeing, a map from IT to actual employees. And what that tells me, and really what we see looking over that time period, is that things definitely got better from the standpoint of some of the technology we're using. But as the attackers continued to improve, and as in general, the effort to manage the technology continued to stay complex, it just continued to keep kind of that effort of complexity built into it. And if you think back to the slide that Zoe was just showing, a lot of the ransomware effort kicked off in that, you know, early 2020 period when COVID triggered. And as always with cybersecurity, you're going to see a lot of things that follow geopolitics, that follow the money, and anything that drives money forward for ransomware groups, which in the end often results in nation states generating funds for that. You get middle, especially SMB and mid-market, get caught in kind of that net, for lack of a better way to put it. So while I think we've gotten better at some areas of operating, we haven't necessarily broadly improved, and my dogs agree with that, clearly.
Thank you, Matt. Absolutely. It's good to have an early warning system, right?
Yes, exactly.
So now let's move into talking about what planning for success looks like. If you're going to maximize your effectiveness, it's going to require some prioritization. You know, it would be great if we could do 100% of everything all the time without a break, but that's not reality. We're going to have to manage limited resources, and managing limited resources means we got to get strategic about where we're spending our time. And if we're talking about how to build effective strategy, this is one of my favorite quotes. Because it gives a much better and more intelligent sounding way to describe this concept that I used to talk about in terms of big rocks and little rocks. But this sounds way more intellectual. So let's go with John Gall's quote here. He says, "A complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that works. The inverse proposition also appears to be true. A complex system designed from scratch never works and cannot be made to work." So I think that the best way to summarize this is our goal is evolution, not transformation. It would be great if we could take one weekend and fix every problem and then we're done. We are secure and we just have to keep doing those things forever and we'll never have a problem again. Unfortunately, security is a fluid thing and it changes with the business and with the market and with our needs. And so it is something that we are going to be continuing to come back to whether we like it or not. So we may as well take that approach from the outset, recognize that this is going to be a change that happens over time, and get strategic about where we want to spend our time first. And there's a lot of ways to do this. You can start doing a survey inside your business. You can talk to the heads of different teams. When we're talking about building out your security strategy, fortunately, there's a lot of tools that are out there in the form of these frameworks. I think a lot of times people look at compliance requirements as their guiding light in figuring out what they need to be doing for security. And there's merit to that because there's a very concrete cost in failing to do so. We as people tend to be more motivated by avoiding loss than potentially gaining in defense. And so, you know, having that stick can be a lot more motivating. But I like these frameworks that aren't necessarily a specific compliance standard, but rather taking a look at their area of focus and trying to build the best strategy recommendations independent of a single or specific compliance requirement. And two of them that I really like are the NIST cybersecurity framework. I don't have it on this slide, but I do want to mention the risk management framework as well, we're talking about security strategy. We're not just talking about mitigating threats. That is an important aspect of it. But I will also give a shout out to that because that takes a more holistic look at potential risk to the business. And the Center for Internet Security just came out with an updated version of their controls version 8.1, just came out. Now, these are very comprehensive frameworks, and they are often cited or referenced in compliance standards that'll come out. If you ever had to deal with a 20-character uppercase, lowercase, special character number password, that was coming out of NIST password requirements that used to be standardized. If you started to see a shift around 2018, 19, talking more about the importance of long, memorable passwords, that was also reflected in updated NIST guidance. So these are really good references. They're also pretty beefy. I think the full version of the cybersecurity framework I couldn't even give you a page count on it because it's a mini site in NIST that'll take you to the different stages and sections. However, both of these frameworks have a great quick start guide, specifically one that is written, some of them, NIST calls it a small business quick start guide. CIS calls it their small to medium enterprise guide. But these are great because these are much more digestible. They're in the range of like 10-page PDFs, and they really break it down into digestible bite-sized pieces that give you specific questions to answer that'll help guide you in what you want to look at as your next step in terms of where to focus. We're going to go through here. And Matt, let's talk a little bit about how you figure out which of these may make sense for your organization.
Yeah, it's I think Zoe made a really good point, which is it's always going to be about, I think a lot of us sadly come to realize this as we go through our profession in IT and security, that it is always going to be about risk for your organization and how you are going about kind of solving those problems in your organization as a whole, which is to say, NIST is going to have kind of risk associated with every single thing that exists on the planet. CIS is very similar in that regard. And depending on your type of organization, you're going to have different compliances that either overlap with NIST, like ISO has its own overlaps with NIST. SOC 2 has its own overlaps with ISO, just as much as it does with NIST. And CIS has its own overlaps as well. And if you are a DoD contractor, for example, you have to start looking a lot closer at, what does having to do the large majority of NIST controls mean my organization? What does CMMC mean for my organization? When we talk to organizations historically, we often like to look at CIS as a good starting point because it has a lot of really kind of normal human language around how to solve problems, how to meet controls, what are the compensating controls associated with those areas, whereas NIST tends to come in more from the standpoint of, here's a 600-page book, try to meet every guideline associated with it. That's why I like to bring up CMMC, because those of you who are DoD contractors, DoD subcontractors, we're also working on our own CMMC kind of effort as well internally. You quickly realize that, these are hundreds to potentially, with subcontrols, thousands of subcontrols that you need to meet in your organization and meet and kind of prove. And I think that something that a lot of us realize as we get into these frameworks is that picking the framework isn't the hard part. Starting with a framework isn't the hard part. Year 2 and year 3 are the hard parts with a lot of these frameworks. When you start getting into not just choosing it, but also saying, here's how we're going to move forward with it. We're going to talk about this a little more on the next slide, but here's how we're going to move forward with it. Here's what we're going to do to solve these problems. It is something that every organization really deserves the time to sit down and say, all right, this is the industry we're in, or this is the industry we sell to. What can we do to be better as an organization? And what can we do by driving kind of our compliance framework and risk framework? And really the way that I like to look at that is that it really is going to come in from buying from the top of the organization. You are never going to be able to meet the entirety of a framework. Like if you're a DoD subcontractor, you're never going to meet CMMC level 2 without company buy-in. Like, it requires everyone to kind of agree that we're going to all move in the same direction, because we want to ensure that there's a commitment to drive success, and we want to ensure that out of that environment?
That was me. I was trying to unmute myself and I muted you instead. Easy mistake.
No worries.
Matt and Zoe, it's basically the same.
Yeah, no, you're good. And so really kind of like the way that I like to look at this for people, as I had said, is, what makes your company successful? What can you do to drive your company to success? And which is to say that you can't do it alone. The company as a whole has to be kind of moving in the same direction together. There we go. So as we kind of look through how it gets implemented across the organization, really what we see is that it's going to depend on where your company is today versus where you're wanting to go. A lot of companies are never going to get into optimize level 5 looking at this, which is to say a lot of organizations really aren't going to want to invest the amount of time and effort it takes to get to that level without really having a plan and process to get to that point. Because security, risk, compliance, it's all very much change day to day. Like it could be great one week, and then the next week you have a critical vulnerability on your SSL VPN, and it's no longer that great because now you have to frantically do that, and things get pushed, and you have to kind of figure out what's going to fit best with your organization. And for us, and when I work with a lot of these organizations, we have about 20,000 organizations on the platform here at Blumira. And what we see is that organizations that have, or at least moving toward operational maturity in some sort of framework, it doesn't particularly matter what framework, are always better aligned as organizations as a whole. And I like to push on this really hard from the IT perspective, especially back when I was operating from the standpoint of we can all be better. We can make your lives easier. Let IT, let your operating kind of side of the business figure out ways to make everyone work better together. Because it's entirely possible that completing your ISO compliance will open up a whole new area of business for your company. They haven't thought about it yet, but the only way to really align everyone is to bring everyone into that conversation, know what the company goals are, other than staying online, and making sure that you can say, all right, this is where we're going to start. This is where we're going to go to. And we're going to stay together and stay in communication during that process, just because it is one of those areas that you will always have something to talk about. It could be having tabletops with your executive team to give them kind of an understanding as to where they fall into this kind of big puzzle that is IT and IT security. It could be all the way to sitting down with your kind of accounting staff and making sure they are secure and able to properly secure their AP side. But in either case, you are supporting the operations of the business. And if you can take those kind of the technology wins and support them from the process perspective broadly in the company, you're always going to get not only more funds, which is great because then you get that nice ratio, but you're also going to have more sanity. I was on call for about 12, 13 years straight. And it's one of those things that I think for a lot of organizations, it's really more of a like, all right, like we talked about 24/7 teams earlier. Like, is it better to have a 24/7 team? Is it better to be on call? Is it better to not need any of that? Is it better to just give it to someone else? And if you're just giving it to someone else, the question then becomes, do they have enough time and people to work on it? Is there really enough going on here? And for me and for Blumira, when we often talk about this, it's really more from the standpoint of how do you drive success for your company? And how do you really start to solve those problems? Most attacks don't happen for no reason out of nowhere. And when we talk about the targeting, especially when it comes to the mid-market, you think back to the Move It attacks from last year, those were specifically targeting a very specific group of people that were exposed to the internet. And for anyone who's been in IT, especially over, let's say, 5-10 years, it's crazy to go from 10, 20 years ago, we were just putting stuff up on the internet, putting it behind auth and just being like, yeah, that's totally fine. And now moving to like, you should have nothing exposed to the internet anywhere. Don't even do SSL VPN anymore. Figure out how you're going to go about it. Because the delta in those two is crazy. And the amount of technological change between those two is also crazy. So as you start to get into the frameworks, it's important to remember, yeah, NIST, CIS might say do zero trust. It's also worth thinking about how does zero trust work for your environment? What's actually fitting into your environment? And the conversation I always like to bring that back to is how much is in the cloud and how much do you even need a VPN anymore? And kind of like, how do you bring everyone together in your organization in a way that fits the process that needs to be run in that organization?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've taken a look at what the challenges are. We've taken a look at how you start to choose your strategy to approach them and to improve them. But now we want to take a look specifically at the reason why you joined the webinar, which is that maximizing part, right? Trying to get the most out of what you have. And that means that the questions that we ask need to be focused on finding 10x versus 10% improvements. You can have improvements on an incremental or an exponential scale, and it depends on your approach to implementing it, right? One of my favorite stories about this is about Taiichi Ono. If you've heard the stop the line example, it's very common in like business school. In an abridged version, Toyota started to move into the US market. They were struggling with this perception of lower quality production, and they needed to address it, right? It meant they didn't just need to have a reliable car, they needed to have a unimpeachably reliable car. And so one of the things that really was a turning point from Toyota moving from that point of entry in the market to, by the late 90s, early 2000s, being synonymous with reliability and quality, starts with a line foreman named Taiichi Ono, who implemented a process called Stop the Line. And his idea was, if we want to have the best reliability possible, we need to empower every person to put their hand up and say, this isn't working, we need to fix it. So they had an andon cord, you pull the cord, the line stops, whoever stopped it identifies what the problem is, and you troubleshoot it then. Now, in the short term, the plants that continued with their existing process had a steady line of production, no real change. Taiichi Ono's plant had a dip because you had to take a lot more time to troubleshoot everything that was going wrong. However, it was an exponential growth because as those problems in the process were improved, there was less downtime and less recall checks that they had to do in the process. And they were also able to build back to that same and then exceed that previous productivity with the higher level of reliability. So that's a good example of taking a exponential approach. You recognize that you may see slower progress in the beginning, but it's because you are building a foundation and solving the problems that will make it easier for you to go faster in the future. One of the ways that we talk about this in terms of security is automation. And this is something that I like to have a lot of caution around, because when we start talking about automation and AI, sometimes people are talking about things that should be automated, and sometimes they're talking about things that could be challenging to automate. So Matt, talk to us a little bit about how you find those things that help automate scale.
Yeah, it's I think automate has become one of the craziest words at this point, because it could mean like so many different things in the grand scheme of it all. And where we like to really look at this from the standpoint of purchasing, identifying, especially thinking back a little further, it's really more of what are the outcomes that you need from this vendor, and how are they going to solve these outcomes for you? And I think especially over the last 5 years, as we've grown in technology and cloud and now AI and LLMs, is that we still see a lot of efforts being what amounts to papered over by people, and people do not scale infinitely. It's one of those areas that you think back to 2010, 2008 during the Great Recession, where we saw a really large push to offshoring in the IT world. There was a dip in hiring, but it came back up after the Great Recession ended. The big question really for me is like, where are the tools? How are people really being driven to success? And are there really this large amount of people open to solve these problems? We know that in the US, at the very least, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, they're only expecting about 17,000 new InfoSec people a year to be added to the workforce as a whole, at the most, per year. And if you think about that, and you think about who's the largest hires, which are going to be the Global 2000, larger organizations, and maybe some of the large service providers, you have to think about how that workforce is going to be deployed to support your needs broadly across those vendors as well. A lot of organizations, which I completely get, are going to buy into solutions that say, well, we'll solve the outcomes for you, don't worry about it. They'll happen. And if they're being solved by exclusively hiring people to bring those outcomes to you, think about how they're going to really support that need and maintain your existing support kind of structure, which is to say, as you grow, as you get bigger, as you work on those frameworks, you want to be with vendors that partner with you, that scale to that point with you and beyond, not ones that you need to operate to make sure that scale is flowing with you. So as you're talking to vendors, as you're working with your customers, internally, externally, your other partners that you work externally with, what is that value that's being delivered to you? And I think for me, that's an area that I often see being an issue. Like I'll give you a real world example. We from a Blumira perspective, when you're looking at buying like SolarWinds logging, which is basically it just collects logs, it's super cheap, like $2,000 a year, versus any other kind of modern quote unquote SIM MDR platform. The prices are essentially 100x difference between those two, depending on the size of your organization. And from the standpoint of the organization, they have to think about, what is the value to me? Did I just need to store logs? What did the framework tell me that I needed to do? What am I missing by just doing that? Or am I missing nothing in some cases, which would be rare, but am I missing nothing? So you have to think about how that environment and how that product is put together. And really, more importantly, how it's been put together and how it will fit within what you are doing. That automation that they've built should improve your own needs and allow you to be able to be comfortable, because that's really kind of the goal of automation. I think often when we think about automation, especially in IT security and IT, it's really easy to jump to, well, I just need this to do everything a human would do, and then I'll pick that one. And we aren't at that point yet. I don't think we ever will be at that point. And when we look across the market, and I think a lot of people have experienced this, it's really easy for automation to bite you just as fast as it's successful for you, which is to say, let's say your CEO gets an email that gets marked as phishing, and they automatically lock out your CEO at that point. But it was a false positive, or it wasn't. It doesn't particularly matter. Do you think your C-suite would be comfortable with you automatically locking out their environments without any initial kind of view from a human perspective? Probably not. But they might, depending on how your risk framework works, how the conversations you've already had with them, and kind of how your organization drives forward as a process. So really what I look for when I do my purchasing, and in general, when I think back, is what is the outcome that I need? What is the value that vendor is going to bring to me to make it? And are they telling me that value will show up in a way that I can't currently see? Because if they're telling you that, you're not going to get that exponential growth out of it, even if it takes you that chance to, or that time to step back, implement it, and move forward. You want that turn to be as low as possible in SMB and mid-market. Sadly, we can't all be Toyota assembly lines. I wish we all could be. But in the cases that we aren't, you still have to take that pause and think, what is the best for me? What is the best for me from an implementation time perspective, as well as what am I going to get out of it from a growth and output perspective? So it's really think about the outcomes, think about the values, but really more specifically, think about them from the standpoint of your broader organization.
And so,
yes.
Matt, I'm going to push it back over to you. I think this is a great example of doing some automation intelligently.
Yeah. So we had this idea here at Blumira where we wanted to kind of, and this is for free, so if any of you want to try this out, by all means. But this was an area where we wanted to try out, how does automation really kind of fit within the realm of cybersecurity? How well does it work, really? And the area that we found the best use cases for this was really using automation and LLMs to provide kind of a semantic understanding of what is happening. So we did this by essentially pulling together a large amount of public data from organizations, looking at things like DMARC and DNSSEC and data on Shodan and anything we can really find about them, and use that to generate kind of a determination of state for the organization as a whole. And what we've learned is that there's a lot of really interesting pieces of information that a lot of organizations really just don't think to look at, because most of us don't think to look at things all the time, which is to say, like, one of the ones that jumps out at me that we see most often is around like hanging PTR records or reverse DNS records. We've seen a lot of situations where organizations just thought that they had stuff pretty well cleaned up, but then they realized that they had an old machine sitting on the internet at an old office that still had the reverse DNS record of an old host name. And it's one of those areas of like, how often do you look for those things? Almost never. Do you think that your reverse DNS pointers are hanging out there? I don't think about it very often, that's for sure. And it becomes this kind of continuous benefit if you regularly review kind of the external face, but you aren't just thinking like, how do I do an external vulnerability scan? Because that is really just kind of the bare minimum. But the hard part of this really is, what's the determination? Like, what do I look like? What do I need to improve? What do I need to change? And LLMs and automation around there has some huge benefits, and we expect to see more benefits moving forward. Where it doesn't really work, at least in our experience, and where I think a lot of we're seeing kind of push in security right now is, well, you just have a chatbot, you just ask the chatbot something, it'll tell you what to do. There's not enough context, there's not enough structure, and it's like talking to any sort of tier one person who happens to just know literally everything in the planet, where it's like, okay, that was an idea, but like, what about this situation here? There's not enough context. So what we've really learned is that these specific one-off kind of like evaluations have a lot of power for people and for organizations from an automation and ease of use perspective. And really kind of, where does your remote workforce land? How do they fit within your environment? How do they use your environment? Are they exposing additional kind of components of your company out there? I've seen RDP exposed to someone's house before from a domain joined environment. Why was that on there? There could be a number of different reasons. But it really is about evaluating what is happening in your environment and using automation to drive understanding rather than using an automation to drive what was be amounted to a human person's brain effort. It's really hard to replace a brain.
Agreed. Great way of putting it. It's hard to replace a brain, indeed. Well, folks, I know I think nobody was expecting to get out here without us mentioning why we're great at least a little bit. But I think rather than bore y'all with a pitch, we want to try and tie it back to what we've been talking about. Taking that approach, trying to figure out the biggest problems to solve first. We've come back to it again and again. If you look at these frameworks, the first step is an assessment, identifying. You need to know where you're at to know where you're going. And so when Blumira was being developed, we started with the SIM. We wanted to make sure that you're getting logs from as many places as possible, that you're normalizing them so you can actually analyze those logs, and then addressing some of the challenges that typically go along with a SIM that make it something that is recommended if you have a full team to manage it. They're hard to implement. They're noisy to tune. It takes a lot of time to clear the findings that show up and figure out which ones can be marked as false and which ones actually demand remediation. So we made a very simple to integrate SIM solution. There's basically 3 ways that you're going to get connected: through a cloud connector, through a virtual sensor, or through, what's the third one that I'm blanking? Oh, endpoint agent, which I'm about to talk to in like literally a second. There we go. So, you know, wherever you're looking, you're going to be able to get your logs pulled in, and you're going to get some managed detections that our team of detection engineers is looking at a huge amount of data, modeling things in the lab, figuring out how we can identify those little breadcrumbs, those canaries in the coal mine that something may be going on. Once you have that visibility and you have the ability to actually do some investigation on it, we're also providing guided playbooks. So if you do have somebody that is now taking on security responsibilities, previously had been handling IT duties, we're going to give them the recipe. We're going to give them the roadmap so that they can actually vet out if that is something that is a legitimate risk or something that they can clear. Once we've got that visibility and ability to respond, the next level, if we look at the common points in attacks, the most common vector that's going to be shared on a technology side is hitting the endpoint, right? If we look at the history of security, there's a reason why the first thing that we see is freakers getting on the phone and exploiting people. And then the next thing we see is our first computer viruses going after that machine. So that means that we want to make sure that we have a good solution on the endpoint. So we have Blumira Agent, gets installed on the endpoint. It is able to gain visibility and pass those logs along. And then we are able to start layering in automation and making it easier to respond more quickly, reduce that mean time to detection and mean time to response, Through that agent, we are able to automatically isolate affected hosts, as well as block traffic to malicious IP addresses. How do we do it? We make sure to simplify the literally 3-item list that I can only remember 2 of for a minute to collect all of those logs together. We're going to transform that data by normalizing it, making it easier to analyze. We're going to deploy those rules and analyze them and surface findings with as much detail as possible. And then I like the combination that we take of guided and automated response, right? So we give you those playbooks to walk through anything routine. We give you the automatic host isolation so that you are able to block emerging threats as they happen. And then if you do have a critical priority issue, we have a 24/7 SecOps team that on those critical issues are able to get on and help you in response. So I find it to be kind of a Goldilocks approach in the middle between something that you're entirely having to lift, build, and manage yourself, and completely handing the reins over to somebody to manage it for you. This is our attempt to provide you with a solution that is going to maximize the available budget that you have. Now, the takeaway for this, before we close it out, I'd love it if you took a look at Blumira. We'd love to talk with you and help you out if we can help keep you safe. If what you take away from this is the philosophy of figuring out where those exponential improvements are, and if you're not using a SIM today, the recognition that you need to get that in place, whether or not it's ours, I'll consider this a success. Matt, any last words before we pass it over to questions?
Not too many. Just a note, like the inherent complexity of defensive security is one of those areas that I think all of us are always looking for the silver bullet to solve cybersecurity. It would be nice if there was a silver bullet to solve cybersecurity. I wish there was. This is as close as I can get to designing a silver bullet in cybersecurity. Maybe someone will be very successful in that 5 to 10 years from now. But what I like to recommend to people is, as you're kind of going through your life cycle of how we grow our company, how we mature our company, like Zoe said, if you use Blumira, if you don't, but think about how you can use data coming out of your company to drive yourselves towards success and how you can do it in the easiest way possible. Because then you get that benefit of driving that data up into your leadership. And then if you have data, then people can't say no. And you get this nice benefit of structured, quantified effort behind you.
That's why you'll notice there's a theme in the domain security assessment. There's an executive summary, breaks down the high points and makes it easier to pass that along to leadership. In Blumira itself, we have executive summaries as well. And basically, this is helping to quantify the work that you're doing so that you can make the case to get more budget where you need it. In terms of what to do next, if you're curious, we'd love for you to try out Blumira. You can sign up at that link there. Even if you aren't ready to try us out, we'd encourage you to take a look at the domain security assessment. Again, that is a free tool. It doesn't require signing up for Blumira's service in order to use. And give us your feedback. It's something that we're still refining. We'd love to make it more useful for you if we can.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a few of my own.
Awesome.
Let's see here. I love it when people have like a free tool to check out. I think that's really cool that you guys have that. So I would say check that out. I've put that link in the resources for you out in the audience. Throw in some questions if you have them in the either in the Q&A box or in our group discussion box. But some of the stuff I was thinking about. Let's pretend for a second. I want to give like a scenario, if you guys don't mind. And either of you can kind of go with this, but let me paint the picture first. Say I'm a new security director. I've just come on someplace. We'll say it's a small to medium-sized business. We'll say it's in FinServ, right? So you kind of know. So I don't want a depends answer. Is what I'm trying to make sure you guys don't give me. So I'm in FinServ. I'm new at this. I've been around for a while, but I'm coming into a new environment. What's one of the first couple of things I should be thinking about as I start? I've gone through the HR thing on day one, right? So obviously I have gotten that part out. But now I've met my team. What are some of the things I should be starting to look at within this new environment, the people, process, all that stuff? Where would you start? And either of you, please.
I can tell you where I always recommend starting in that situation, asking for every signed contract associated with IT and cybersecurity. So you know what you're using, what was purchased, and what the end dates are for those. The worst part of starting a new role like that is coming into there wanting to make changes and realizing you're hooked for another year and a half in certain areas. So it's not like a fun part of the role, but it's one of those areas that I always recommend really getting a view as to, and the easiest way to do that is to say, where are we spending money on IT and cybersecurity, and getting a view as to where and how that money is being leveraged. Because it's possible you'll find money that you could use somewhere else just as much as you're going to find where those holes are and where spend should be. I know that's not the most fun technical answer, but it's the most practical answer I'll give you on that. I'll let Zoe go. So.
No, I think that that's a great start. And it's really like my answer would really be a theme of, before you start making changes, you need to get the lay of the land. And so I think that looking at contracts is a great way to do that. Looking at what is and more likely isn't documented is a great way to do that. And also, talking with folks from around the organization. If you're trying to get an understanding of the functional processes in the business, the documented processes in the business may or may not be the functional processes in the business. And if there is a discrepancy between those two, you're not likely to know it unless you're getting that feedback directly from the people that are trying to follow it, so that you can actually bring those into alignment.
The tribal knowledge versus what might be in somebody's playbook, right? So yeah, that's important to pick up on. Yeah.
Aligning with your stakeholders and your peers is worth a lot. And that's where you get those exponential areas of like, oh, we're burning a lot of time doing nothing here. Where can we really change the success for the organization? Because no one wants to work forever on nothing that has no benefit. But companies as a whole are very good at kind of finding a process and sticking with that process until someone's like, that's a crazy thing that we're doing. We should stop doing that.
Yeah, the dangers of we've always done it this way, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah. Although sometimes I got to say, there
works.
is a reason for that, right? I mean, sometimes there is a good reason for that stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, you might learn that you're using a 30-year out-of-date OT technology that has to stay there without you spending like $5 million. It's entirely possible, but it's good to know.
Right. Yeah. Well, you need to know the outliers, right? So that makes sense. Again, visibility. Okay. Good. I like that answer because I didn't think you guys would say this, but I kind of wonder if anybody in the audience was thinking this, and I hope not. But like, we're gonna shut down access across the board, stuff like that, because you just never know what somebody might come in and do, right? So. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, don't do that.
Please don't do that.
My favorite thing to do day one of a new job is
Department of No.
Yes, exactly.
How to make friends and influence people, right?
Right.
Are there certain industries that, like, within the SMB market, are there certain industries? I feel like manufacturing probably is a good example of this. Are there certain ones where it's like these folks really, somebody needs to take the time to really help them? Are there certain ones where you're finding like, we got to help our brothers and sisters in this industry? Who are they?
I would say manufacturing is one. I think that if you look at where organizations in an industry fall along the adoption curve, you can get a decent idea of how much additional coaching and emphasis you're going to have to do to get them on the right path for security. And what I mean by that is, if you have to stop and have a conversation first about why it really should be a priority to replace that Windows XP computer that is still running a mission critical POS service, that is something that you're going to need to get buy-in from stakeholders. There's going to be some money layout there. At the same time, it would be great if we could snap our fingers and get rid of all legacy technology. That's not the reality. Sometimes there's a reason why those things stay in place. But I think that those businesses that at an industry level are going to have more challenges are going to tend to be those that are slower to adopt any change.
Yeah, very, very much. I'll echo what Zoe said. Manufacturing often falls in that area just because a lot of manufacturing predates the internet. The factories predate when there were networks there. And a lot of this technology was hooked in throughout the last 30 years to enable better manufacturing, which is great. But that doesn't mean there was inevitably the same upgrade path during that. And I think you're going to see, we alluded this earlier, some of those changes with CMMC and anyone who makes anything for the DoD. You're going to see some changes of like, yep, time to be secure. But that introduces a whole new situation where, if you've never done 2FA, if you've never had a VPN, and all of a sudden the DoD comes to you and says you need to meet 170 NIST controls by next year, go. Like, you may as well just start shelling out cash at that point. And unless your organization is aware as to what's going to happen, and that gets back to that alignment up to the top of like, how does the company make money? How does everyone grow and be successful? If that's the direction, there's a really easy way to align everyone, but it's a conversation to have. Credit unions also are an area that they're up and coming in many different ways from a technology perspective, but don't have the same spend that banks have, just because banks are banks and credit unions are credit unions. They're owned by the people that are putting money into the credit union. So they're getting a lot better over time, but that kind of going back to the ratios are always going to be lower than banks. They're always going to be kind of pushing that older technology out and implementing that newer technology. And of course, local municipalities are another big one that we see, and it could be utilities, it could be counties, it could be cities. But either way, people don't like to pay taxes. People don't like to pay taxes even more to fund IT and cybersecurity people in their cities and local gov. It would be great if they would, but they don't. So it's one of those areas that for a lot of your counties, it could be the county you live in, they are running at a situation where they're just trying to make it all work. And technology is often not made for them. And it's really more that they have, if you haven't had a budget for 30 years, it's hard to just make a budget come out of nowhere to drive that forward. And how is the federal government supporting them? How are we getting grants for them? It becomes a much bigger, complex thing for that side as well. And of course, as we all hear in the news all the time, how utilities are getting hacked all the time. It just goes really more back to if you set up your utility 30 years ago on the internet and you never changed it, where is it today and how do you move it forward?
Right. I've got a couple more questions, and then we've got to wrap up. We're almost out of time. We could probably do a whole hour on cybersecurity insurance, but talk to me a little bit. Are there ways that people can kind of, because I have to believe that a lot of the small mom and pops or some of the smaller SMBs, they look at the cyber insurance and just go, I don't even know where to begin with this stuff. What kind of pointers might you throw out for those folks?
Cyber insurance it's such a weird market at this point. And it's changed a lot. I think 3 or 4 years ago, when a lot of us looked at cyber insurance, we said, well, that industry is going to be dead because they kept having to give out payments. It was just regular. And at this point, and I just had a conversation with someone in cyber insurance the other week about this, it's hard for me to tell or a better way to put this, it's hard for me to tell what the rate of non-reported incidents are into cyber insurance at this point. Because in a lot of situations, let's say you're a mom and pop shop, you got whatever coverage you could get, and there's a fair amount out there. Some of them are very good. Some of them vary. But in a lot of cases, they have some amount of hook associated with them. And is it easier in that situation to just kind of, mum's the word, don't say anything, and we'll move on with our life if we didn't get fully ransomed? And I think both of those things become really hard to kind of circle the square on. Because how can you have a situation where cyber insurance is protecting people and a situation where people aren't reporting to cyber insurance because they don't want to deal with the negative impact of doing it? So I think, look for an insurance partner who wants to support you and where you are in your life cycle as a company. If you're a bigger organization, let's say you're a mid-market organization, or insurers like Coalition do a really good job of kind of working with the smaller organizations and working with partners around them. If you're really small, there are ones like Founder Shield and Beltex that are out there that are really good at supporting the small organizations that just need to drive it forward. But also, and I'm going to go back to a business alignment thing, annoyingly for everyone on this call, this also goes back to what is your business what's the risk tolerance of your business? What is the policy that your business needs to have? Do you have customers that are saying you need to have this type of policy? Because you may be able to kind of lift this into conversation with your company leadership of, okay, this is what we're going to do. We need to get this type of policy based off requests from customers. So we're going to go to Coalition because they can provide this at the cheapest. And I think in a lot of cases, it's really about kind of like, annoyingly, it's back to like shopping around insurance in the 90s for cars. It's like, all right, who gives me the best rate? Because it's really more about what is the hook for me, and are they going to do IR for me? Are they going to do a payout for me? Is there something that I really want or get a benefit of having there? Because otherwise, it's a soft market right now. They're just giving out policies. Find the one that just kind of works best for you otherwise.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. It's funny because I was thinking when you were talking about outdated technology and stuff like that, and then you just brought up car dealers and stuff. Can we get rid of the dot matrix printers that the car dealers use? I mean, come on. Why are those still that I think, why? Come on.
I mean,
anyway, that's more. We're never going to answer that one. But
somebody thinks that that's a good ASMR sound. I think that's really it.
Must be it. Maybe the finance guy that's how he goes to sleep. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me that they still use those because it's like
Truly.
I used to sell copiers, so it's like it's in my head. Like 20 years ago, I sold copiers, but yeah, dot matrix printers, which was part of my Apple IIe package that I bought when I was like 12. They're still around somehow, but is it because they're so secure?
I mean, probably about as secure as a fax machine. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you both for entertaining my questions. If we have anybody out there we didn't answer your question for, I'm going to ship these questions out to the group. We'll get you some answers, and hopefully Matt or Zoe will respond via email for you. So thank you for that. I've got to get everybody wrapped up and out to the rest of their day. But hey, before I let you go, we've got more stuff coming. Secure World Digital, we always have more things on the horizon. And I'm not making that up. This week, actually, on Thursday, we've got vulnerability management in the world of AI. And then we have the following week, migrating risk with IT/OT security convergence. We kind of brushed a little bit on IT/OT stuff today, so check that out if you're in that space. Are you immune to cyber attacks? Think again. That one's coming up on the 17th. And then on the 19th, closing out the year, and then I get to go on vacation. Woohoo! Cybersecurity, it's not just Bob's job anymore. So we're going to find out what Bob's job is now, apparently. So we'll figure that one out. If you guys haven't already, grab your certificate of attendance. Should be worth 1 CPE credit. It is a pop-up. So again, if you have problems grabbing that, just shoot me a quick email. But I want to say thank you to Blumira for making this possible. Grab those resources that I loaded in there. I've got the assessment link in there as well. So take advantage of the free stuff when you can. This is the holiday season. This probably, maybe, and fingers crossed for you guys, a slower time for you guys. Might be a good time to actually check some of these things out, especially when someone's offering you a free tool to check out your environment. You got to know what's there or you can't protect it, right? So anyway, that's what I'm going to say about that. But hey, join me on Thursday. We're going to talk about the AI risks. And then next week, we got more stuff along with our West Coast virtual conference. So that'll close out the year for everybody there too. I've got a lot of stuff, but we'll see you on Thursday. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye, all.